This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another SGP Deep Dive webinar. Today, our topic is management of change. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce to you Frank Bailey from Smyth Corporation, as well as Wendy Nadan, our SGP Lead Auditor, both members of the SGP Technical Committee. And I'm just really excited to hear what they have to say about this new certification criteria requirement. Frank?
Thank you, Marcy. And thank you, everyone who joined us and taking time out of your day. Hope you find this informative. You have one of the best in the SGP world, and Wendy, who will pick up in a moment. So we're going to talk about management of change. We have introductions, the management of change, and then the questions, which will be our agenda. As Marcy said, any questions that you have, please put those into the panel. We'll get those at the end. So what is management of change? It's anticipating the consequences. No matter what we're changing, we always have to manage what, to, and how to affect the change. And what we look at is the impact of sustainability performance in a facility, buildings, roof, equipment, HV, new press, compressor, the inputs of materials, the inks, the substrates, and the cleaning solvents. When and who, we should always be proactive in the process before decisions are made. We always want to design it in rather than try to address it later. Management making capital spending decisions, building changes, equipment changes, the purchasing folks who place the orders, department managers, new substrates, inks, cleaning solvents. And we always want to make sure that the key individuals, the stakeholders, are aware and are receiving the training so we can manage the change. And the why. Making changes to the building, equipment, and materials is an opportunity to change direction. We always want that direction to be a positive direction. New equipment will be around for a while. Yes, it will be. So locks in the technology, global carbon emissions, the target reduction set for 2030, which is right around the corner. I still remember 1975. Will be expensive to replace fossil fuel. Burning equipment before the end of life ensures that there are no health or safety surprises, which are very key. It ensures regulatory compliance. And with that, Wendy, you ready to go?
Thank you, Frank, for running us through that. So, as Frank already mentioned, management of change encompasses a lot of different issues, from very large things, which are maybe infrequent, such as if you're extending your facility footprint, your building, to smaller things such as the day-to-day chemicals and substrates that you're ordering. So it encompasses all of those things. Primarily, what I'm going to give some examples about are about carbon emissions, because this is one of the topics of the day in terms of sustainability. So if we can just forward one more, Frank, one more click there, Frank. I think it's going to bring up the arrows here. So I put on this slide just to give you an indication of what countries and individuals and also businesses are looking at in terms of carbon emissions. So I looked at the numbers for the US. So in 2020, the actual reduction of 2005 carbon emissions in the US was 11%. That was where the nation was sitting a couple of years ago. The next target is in 2030, which is to reduce the 2005 emissions by 50%. Who knows if that 50% target will stay or it'll change, but it's going to be somewhere 30 to 50% is my best bet. But you can make your own assessment of where you think that those targets are going to shift. The next target is for the US is that it will be electricity, that the electricity supply infrastructure will be carbon neutral in 2035. So that's only another 5 years. And finally, most countries are aiming to be carbon neutral by 2050. Those are the kind of timeframes we're looking at. So reality check, where are we now? We're in 2022. The next goal is in 2030. We've got 7 years. So about another 30% reduction in carbon emissions in 7 years. That's not going to be an easy thing to do. That's a big ask. And that's on a national level, but also a lot of facilities are starting to look at this as well. So if we can just take a look at an example of how management of change fits into this kind of timeline. So if we can just move on to the next slide, Frank. These are some of the consequences when the changes that Frank outlined to your building, to equipment, and to materials that you use. Here are some of the performance indicators that can be impacted. So depending on what your choices are, your energy usage can be reduced. So I think most facilities are familiar with switching out lighting to LED bulbs. That's going to reduce your electricity usage. Water usage, depending on what particular you're making in a facility. Again, if you're renovating or if you're extending your footprint, you can choose to install water-saving fixtures, toilets, and faucets and the like. In some of your process equipment, there are options if it's a water-using process to reduce water usage as well. Energy usage usually includes a reduction in the carbon footprint because any reduction in electricity usage is going to translate into a smaller carbon footprint. How much depends on where you're located and what the electricity generating mix is in your particular location, but energy usage is going to give you a gain in reducing your carbon footprint. Changes to chemicals are going to have an impact on the indoor air quality, what your employees are exposed to in terms of those chemicals indoors. And then those chemicals eventually get emitted out into the environment. So very likely could have an impact on your emissions to the environment as well. So things like inks, if you're switching from water-based or conventional inks into UV inks, definitely both of those will have an impact on the indoor air quality and emissions to the environment. Use of non-renewable resources, so plastics, for example, at the moment are manufactured from oil, which is, as we all know, is a non-renewable resource. Paper, traditional printing comes paper-based, and I think everybody's pretty familiar with the FSC certification, which is set up to establish well-managed forests. And all of these, any of these changes can have an impact on the amount of solid and chemical waste generated. And of course, health and safety is a factor to consider as well. So if you're changing your chemistry, for example, if that has an impact on emissions indoors, then that is a health and safety aspect of your facility. But equipment changes as well will have things such as machine safety, so guarding. Those are considerations. So old equipment that you might have had in operation in your facility for, let's say, decades for some printers, was built and designed to the health and safety standards from the day. And now those standards are much higher. So all new equipment is going to come designed with better guarding built in already. Let's take a look at an example, if you are going to build an extension, if you're going to extend your building, how does management of change impact this particular example? So as Frank already mentioned, the time to look at management of change is in the very early stages in the design phase of the project. So some of the questions to ask for this particular example is, how is the space going to be heated and cooled? So at the moment, most places use natural gas for heating. Some facilities use electric, but I think the vast majority use natural gas. So going back to that time frame that I outlined for reducing the carbon footprint, that is going to necessitate eliminating fossil fuel combustion. So that's the natural gas that we all love to burn to heat our facilities, and also in our houses. We're very much reliant on that to provide heating. So what is the technology that is available right now to reduce the impact on our carbon footprint? That's air source heat pumps. So air source heat pumps are now available for residential use. And I'm not sure the technology for industrial spaces, but I have seen some examples of where they are being used. And the switch from natural gas to an air source heat pump will have a big impact on the carbon footprint of that building extension that you are now planning out. Once it's been built, you kind of missed the opportunity. So again, before the decisions are made, manage that change. Consider these opportunities, consider these options right up front when you're costing out the project. Another question to ask, how is the power going to be provided? So here are just some ideas that you can consider. Can you include solar panels on the roof as part of that build? Or now there are solar walls that you can actually build right into buildings as well. That will reduce your dependence on the grid, on sunny days, obviously. But that's another way that you can design in a way to reduce your carbon footprint. And finally, if you're looking at a building, then what energy efficiency features can the design include? So, the no-brainer is LED lights, I think, now. But also you can look at, what are the levels of insulation for the roof and the walls? Because once you've paid for that energy, you'd rather that it stays within your building and it doesn't get lost outside, because that's money that's leaking out of your building. Many facilities already use occupancy sensors, and all of these options are going to reduce energy consumption, which is also going to translate into savings, of course, and to reduce your carbon footprint. Let's take a look at another example here, just to walk you through the process of if you're going to replace a delivery vehicle. So you've got a vehicle, it's coming to end of life, it's not very reliable. Maybe the maintenance costs are getting a bit prohibitive, so you need to replace that vehicle. This is the time to be asking the questions again to manage this change. So what are those questions you're going to ask? What size of a vehicle are we going to need, and what range is it going to require? How far are we going to need it to drive in any one day? So what are our options? The options are now electric, diesel, or gas. Those are pretty much the options you're looking at right now. So the implication on your sustainability performance is, again, your carbon footprint. If you own delivery vehicles, then the fuel that they burn are included in a Scope 2 carbon footprint. So if you can switch from a fossil fuel burning vehicle to an electric vehicle, that is going to reduce your carbon footprint. Somewhat that depends on the emission factors for the electricity in the grid you purchase it from, but nevertheless, it's going to be less than 100%. So what's the status of electric vehicles now? They're hard to get, passenger vehicles. The supply is expected to ease in the next few years, certainly running up to 2030. The supply of electric vehicles is going to significantly improve. Short delivery trucks now are available for urban delivery routes so that they can get around town and get back at the end of the day before they need to be charged. Long-haul trucks, technology isn't quite there just yet. And something to consider in the decision to purchase your vehicle is look at the lifetime cost of the vehicle, not just the purchase price. I think, we're pretty familiar with passenger vehicles that the upfront cost is significantly higher than the equivalent gas or diesel vehicle, but that doesn't take into account that charging an electric vehicle is considerably cheaper than gassing it up, especially with the prices of fuel at the moment. Even if they come down a bit, you could be looking at a passenger vehicle, an electric charge might cost you in the order of $5, something like that, depending on where you are. Whereas to gas it up, again, depending on where you are, you could be looking at 50, 60, 70 bucks. So a big difference in the fuel costs of that particular vehicle. So when you project that out over the lifetime of that vehicle, depending on the battery life of the vehicle, you might well find that an electric vehicle is actually cheaper now than the equivalent diesel or gas. If you do decide to buy an electric vehicle, then another question is, do you need to have a recharging station on site, for example? Do you need the technology to go along with that? And if you do decide to do that, then you can also make it available for employee use and encourage employees to make the switch to electric vehicles. So again, these are the kinds of questions and considerations to make upfront before decisions are made. And whichever way you decide to go, it should be based on a knowledge of all the options and all the implications depending on which choice you ultimately decide to make. And if we can just move on to the next slide. SGP in the version 4 certification criteria does require that facilities develop a written procedure to document how they are going to manage change in their facilities. So it needs to describe responsibilities. So if you've got a capital project, that is going to mean senior managers, people at the executive level, those are the decision makers there. So they're going to need to be aware of this particular process and how that feeds into your sustainability management system. The written procedure will need to describe how purchasing decisions will be made, who is going to be involved in it, how it's going to be documented, and what considerations are going to be made, what factors to be prioritized in that selection process. So, for example, most facilities are going to buy equipment because there is a production need. They've got customers that need a particular product, so that's going to drive it, or you've got equipment that's at end of life, so you need to replace it. However, management of change within a sustainability management system should also consider factors in addition to those primary drivers for the new purchase. And finally, that written procedure needs to describe how your selection process and decisions are documented. The tracker does have a template available in the written procedures tab. So if you're still having a hard time getting your head around this whole management of change issue, then you can start with that written procedure and you can edit it to meet your particular needs, or you can create your own procedure if you already have one that fits your location better. And then once you switch to version 4 of the certification criteria, which comes into effect for everybody at the very latest, January 1st, 2024, you'll need to upload that procedure to the impact tracker. So that's my spiel about management of change. Let's open it up to questions from the floor, and I'll be happy to answer anything that you can throw out there.
Thanks, Wendy. I have one actually, because I know that when the technical committee was going through the criteria and looking to update it, so looking at this, it does seem to be a bit more involved than just consider the impacts when you're changing out equipment or chemicals, which was the old certification criteria requirement. So Are there others, or who from the company do you recommend is engaged in this process within the when you start looking at management of change and you start looking at these issues, such as the ones you outlined?
So this is a bit different to the normal sustainability written procedures that typically tend to apply to the folks on the printing floor or maybe their supervisors. This one is more targeted at people at the top end of the organization. So depending on your business structure, the executive team or the senior managers, the decision makers when money is going to be spent. So this isn't your typical target group. So this is going to really need a different approach for the training and the education part of your management system. So that is the group that needs to be aware that, firstly, that this procedure even exists and how it integrates into the management system. Because typically senior management's involvement in the SMS is only in the annual management review, where they do a very high level review of the the performance of the management. So this is going to bring them into more of the operational side of the management system.
Marcy.
Yes.
This is Frank.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I'd add to that too, if I may, is when we are working with our executive team as far as change management, one of the things that I've put in place is 3 things that we need to answer from the executive side. Is what are we going to change? What are we going to change to? And how are we going to positively affect that change? And as we go through change management, we answer all of those questions in depth for each section that we're looking at. And it helps keep everybody on track. And at the end of the day, it gives you a timeline. And it's a really good tool for managing at that level.
Excellent, because I do see that when you are starting to look, and Frank, you might have some input here, when you do start looking at some of these projects, for the SGP certification process, you also could end up with a continuous improvement project.
Yes, and you often do. You often do.
Do you have an example of what you all worked through that did end up as a continuous improvement project?
Inks.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, when we started looking at how do we positively affect the change, right? What are we going to change? What are we going to change to? And how do we positively affect the change? One of the things that we looked at was inks. And we said, okay, if we go down and we change these inks, what does it do? Right? We're going to change it to the inks. How do we positively affect that? And what's the outcome? So when we changed the inks from one supplier to another, it was all the stakeholders were involved. We had all the communication, the documents, and it turned into a full-blown continuous improvement project that at the end of the day was phenomenal for our customers, the environment, and Smyth.
Excellent. Yeah, that's the one thing that I look at when you are contemplating these issues of change within your facility is some of these areas where you're looking at changing out a chemical. Oftentimes you don't reap all the benefits that you can. And I think by utilizing this management of change format and looking at these issues, you are able to capitalize on what you're doing and able to truly publicize may not be the right word, but really get the word out about what you've been doing and how you are able to create a better work environment.
Correct. Yeah, it's really important too. And when we say stakeholders, when we're looking at something like this, we don't keep it internal. We'll talk to our customers. Tell them this is what we're going to do. This is how it matches up with what you have. This is the changes. There's chemical change, whatever it is. So they have the facts and they help us manage everything, and it makes it more seamless.
Oh, interesting. So you do find that by including, I would imagine, also the suppliers and the customers in the conversation, then you're able to once again reinforce the fact that Smyth is walking down that sustainability pathway, and managing change is just one more element of your journey.
That's correct. Yep. It's a very positive approach.
Excellent. Are there any, I feel like I'm monopolizing, but this is a great conversation. Are there any questions from our audience? Really? So Wendy, are there any other tools within the tracker or within the SGP resource library that really speaks to management of change? I cannot recall at the moment if we also uploaded anything within the internal verification site that asks them to track some elements.
Where you will really see the impact of management of change is in the metrics, of course, because the management of change from a sustainability perspective is all about anticipating the impact on the environment and then steering the selection, whether it be for equipment or materials, in a direction that is going to deliver a benefit to the environment. You'll see that show up in either your energy usage, and energy usage is directly related to your carbon footprint, of course, but maybe also in your VOC emissions, which is part of the metrics, maybe in your water usage or even solid waste. It will show up somewhere in the metrics.
That's a really valid point, because I would believe then, based, Frank, on what you all have done with your engagement display that's part of the tracker, then those metrics and the reductions that you see through the use of some of these projects and by managing change in the facility do show up in your engagement display.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, are there any other questions? I will remind everyone, and I will be sending out an email to everyone about our next upcoming deep dive webinar, which will be the last one in this series on our new audit templates, where Wendy will be covering the environmental audit, the safety and health audit, as well as the sustainability management system audit template that the technical committee has updated and included in the tracker for everyone's use. I will also say be on the lookout for an announcement for the SGP Sustainability Summit that will be held July 20th in Boston, Massachusetts at Fenway Park. It will be an in-person event, and we're really excited about bringing back our regional sustainability summits. So with that, thank you, Frank. Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate your time. Great presentation. And if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and contact the SGP program, or go ahead and email Wendy directly at wendy@nadanconsulting.com. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity.